counter-terrorism. So we have a problem of actually getting reform into the police force. I don't hold the police constables responsible for this. I don't hold anybody in the police force responsible. But there's no doubt that if we're going to get lower crime and more effective policing, we need to carry through reform.
Is it a
poking a stick? That's what Windsor is about.
Are you saying, therefore, it is indeed, as Blunkett says, poking a stick in the lion's den, but a stick that needs to be poked in the lion's den?
Well, of course, it's a wonderful metaphor. Poking a stick in a lion's den, you get it bitten off. I think he meant an ant's nest or something. But of course, it is designed to provoke change, not to provoke rebellion, reaction, antagonism, or whatever. That's the purpose of it. And the simple truth is that we really do have to get some reform of our police force if we're going to get the right outcome. And one last point, just to say how irrational some of this is. I mean, there were things in the Windsor Review which I didn't agree with, but I talked to my local police federation and they were upset about the idea that all of them would actually have to pass a fitness test. It seemed to me there are some aspects of the reaction to Tom Windsor which are just downright irrational. I want a copper to be able to chase a thief and catch him, not fall down with a heart attack halfway.
Salma Yaqub.
I think if you're being asked to do such a serious job as reform the police, of course it would be an advantage to have gone through those ranks, to have an understanding of what it actually takes. Because it's always painful to reform, to change ways that have been set. So if you want to make that as smooth and as efficient as possible, if your intention is to have a better police force because you believe some changes need happening, then surely you need some trust from the very people that you're asking to change. And by imposing somebody, and already the fact it's controversial, that's going to be a more difficult process, not an easy process. So I think this government's got it completely wrong on this.
You think, to use a phrase away, you think if you want to have radical reform, it's better to set a copper to catch a copper than it is to have an outsider to catch the copper.
It's about making sure that that change is real and deep and not just some superficial cosmopolitan change and to grab a few headlines, but actually doesn't mean a real change from top right down to the bottom. And I think people who have been through that process, who understand how it works, have the trust of the people who they're trying to lead, because it's a leadership role ultimately, and people don't like to be forced. And by having it done in that way, I think the changes would be more meaningful and more genuine.
Douglas Murray.
Well, sometimes imposing somebody from outside, as some put it, is the only way to reform some of these parts of the public sector. It's the same with aspects of the NHS and many other much beloved parts of this country. We always hope that they can be reformed from within, but sometimes radical action is needed. Sometimes that is somebody being, as Salma says, imposed from without. But, one of the things that suggests to me this might not be such a bad thing are the number of vested interests that come straight out when something like this happens. There are a lot of people who would not want Tom Windsor to succeed in his task. David and indeed Alan know the lie of the land on this far better than I do, but I just wanted to make one other point, which is this. When Alan says the police feel alienated now, Alan, that is not a new thing. That isn't something that's happened only since the coalition. The police in this country can be said to have felt alienated for many years now, and it's partly because there has been a complete breakdown between the public and the police in what the public expect of the police. One week we expect them to go in and deal with rioters, and then another week there's an inquiry into it and the police are exposed one way. Another week we say, why are the police not there? Another, why are there too many?
Douglas,
there
it's the
is
first
a breakdown.
time the police have had this gap between them and the government. I can't remember the last time the police went on their version of a strike. They can't go on an official strike, so on their holiday they actually joined in the protests against the government cuts.
2 years ago. It was simply 2 years ago when Jackie Smith was Home Secretary.
OK. I'm going to leave that there with a reminder of the... Alan, you want a quick word?
Just want to answer this point. It would be different if you were dealing with a police force where public satisfaction was low and crime was rising. Actually, this government inherited the first government ever to inherit falling crime. It started with Michael Howard, Conservative Home Secretary, and it carried over that period, and enormous changes, police, community support officers, neighbourhood policing, etc. But the issue is this, as I said, David, it's not about what's in that report, which says that the policing should be a graduate-only profession, for God's sake. Even if that was right, asking the man who produced a controversial report to be the head of Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary with no police experience whatsoever is a hugely provocative act. They know it's a provocative act, and police officers right across this country, good police officers who put their lives on the line every day, will feel completely let down by this decision.
Which is my cue to give you the number for any answers, which is 03700 100 444, and the email address any.answers@bbc.co.uk after the Saturday broadcast of this programme, and is, incidentally, the first Any Answers with Anita Anand fielding your calls, your emails, your tweets and texts. Plus, she's going to be, this evening, live on Twitter straight after this broadcast on the @BBC Radio 4 account / thank you. There is a lot of technology of which I'm fast acquiring huge knowledge. I'll do it once more. At the @BBC Radio 4 account, #BBCAQ. Phew, got there. Anita, I hope you're listening and get it better than I can. We'll go on to our next, please.
Philip Baldwin. Are members of the panel concerned that a company which admits logistical mistakes in providing stewards for the Jubilee weekend has secured contracts to provide security for the Olympics?
This company, I think, is a reference to Close Protection UK, which has profusely apologised because two or perhaps three of its volunteers, interns, however you want to describe them, arrived early on Saturday morning at 3 a.m. Rather than the 5 a.m. when they were expected, and there were not appropriate provisions for them. Douglas Murray.
Oh, I don't know. I've never heard of Close Protection UK till this week. I think it was a bit bold to just decide what a company is and isn't fit for based on, frankly, as far as I can see, a couple of very alarmist newspaper headlines and a rather alarmist tweet from Mr. Prescott.
You wouldn't know he's running for office, would you?
Me?
No, Prescott.
Oh, God. I had no idea I was running for office. The problem with this story is that actually, the moment you dig a little bit beneath it, you find that the story is very much different. I was reading today accounts of other people who were working for this organisation last weekend who had a very nice day. They got some work experience and so on. So, you know, as ever, there's a sort of proxy war going on. And once again in this country, you know, we always fight these things in completely the wrong way. I wish we'd have a grown-up discussion in this country about the nature of work. I wish we'd have a grown-up discussion about the very, very real and serious societal issue we face with massive youth unemployment. You know, when you have youth unemployment like we have now, it very swiftly becomes a social issue. And I just wish we would have the discussion about how we get young people into work, which will include people working for nothing for a few days or for a few weeks, getting work experience, getting things on their CV. It will involve that sometimes. But instead, once again in Britain, we have crappy class warfare from clapped-out politicians instead of a real debate.
Salma Yaqub.
Well, I'm trying not to reel from that crappy class warfare. You know, as somebody who comes from Birmingham and as somebody who does know the problems of inner city areas, well, in a lovely rural area this evening, but actually there are divides in society, and actually I think that's the taboo. That's not what is talked about. We should hear about big society and all of this. And you mentioned youth unemployment. Youth unemployment is increasing because of the measures of this government. Austerity is not working. Austerity was supposed to be the medicine, but actually turned out to be a poison. We're seeing people laid off work. We're seeing people who want to work but can't find jobs, and yet then themselves are blamed as some kind of scroungers. And I find real issue with that. And then to call it class warfare when people who are feeling pain
it is class
protest
warfare
about
for John Prescott tried to use the Queen's Jubilee to claim as if during the Queen's Jubilee an opportunity was being seized to simply exploit young people to work for free. That is a low discussion. We should have the discussion about not an anti-this government or pro-that government, but simply how we get young people into work. And it cannot be done by class warfare of the kind that you seem to find appealing.
Please don't put words in my mouth, and that does not help at all. For people who are standing up for people's dignity, don't call that class warfare. That's about standing up for people's dignity.
Everyone's for that, Salma. Everyone's for that.
This is not about saying people shouldn't have work experience. Who's going to argue against work experience? But when people are told you'll be paid X amount of money for going along and being a steward, and then find themselves having to stay the night outside under London Bridge without access to toilet facilities for 24 hours, I think it's right that people are allowed to have dignity.
Hold on,
Let's not make it about the Jubilee. This is about a company which was getting millions of pounds for stewarding, yet when it came to paying their workers, didn't. That's the issue here. So let's not conflate the issues in this rabble-rousing way.
Alan Johnson.
Well, I want to have that big grown-up debate that Douglas talked about, because I think he's absolutely right. As I understand, Close Protection Limited are going to provide paid employment at the Olympics. But John Prescott's right. If there are incidents where people were dropped off in the middle of the night with nowhere to go, it needs to be looked into. The government can't subcontract responsibility for this. And I think John Prescott's absolutely right. The government have to check that everything was right about that. On the issue about long-term youth unemployment, if you look at the graphs anywhere in the country, you'll see that youth unemployment, 18 to 24-year-olds, was coming down at the end of the global financial problem caused by Lehman Brothers because of something called the Future Jobs Fund. It started to go up again when that policy was abandoned. And what the government have been trying to do ever since, and the work programme is the latest reiteration of this, is to find a way to encourage employers to take on young people, because they're in the worst possible situation. Most people lose their job and find another job very quickly. If you've never had a job, you fall into that trap. You can't get any work because you haven't got experience, and you can't get any experience because you can't find a job. That becomes institutionalised, it becomes generationalised, and it is the most damaging, most corrosive effect on society. The big grown-up debate takes us back to the budget. There was nothing in the budget about youth unemployment. There was nothing to encourage companies, and perhaps a national insurance holiday for taking on 18 to 24-year-olds, so employers are incentivised to do that. Perhaps putting the tax on bankers' bonuses again that provided the money to pay for the Future Jobs Fund, and will actually be able to create more money to get young people into work. That's the big grown-up debate about youth unemployment.
Alan, in which case, let's make the following agreement. We all agree that some aspects of the banking sector went very, very bad and everybody has had to pay for it, yes. But your government, the Labour government, when you came into power, had received a situation where there were balanced books, a balanced budget. And when you left, we were running a budget deficit in this country of £170 billion.
This is really strange and even perverse, because you remember Lehman Brothers collapsed. There was a global financial problem that this government didn't recognise. Nothing to do with international politics was to do with the fiscal deficit. Now, at the moment, when we're in a double-dip recession, remember this government inherited growth and delivered recession. They didn't inherit... They inherited... The fact is they inherited growth of 1.8%. They inherited growth and have delivered a recession. I know they act as if they inherited a recession and delivered growth.
Alan, I'm going to call you to order. The congregation is now... Congregation is not quite the right term under the circumstances. I'm very glad to say, is waiting to hear what David Davis has to say about this.
Well, I've been sitting here open-mouthed at the heroic defence from Alan of a government that gave us a £168 billion deficit every year, not just 1 year. Now, look,
Let's come back. Hold it, everyone. Let's for the moment. Philip Baldwin asked a specific question. So, just for the sake of it, let's answer the question.
I will come straight back to the question. The question was, if you remember, whether we should accept a company that makes these mistakes. You know, we're in Yorkshire. We have a saying around here, which is, "He who makes no mistakes makes nout." And